I woke up to my phone vibrating on the nightstand at exactly 6:13 a.m., the bright screen cutting through the darkness of our bedroom. The notification made my blood run cold. Bank alert. Large withdrawal attempt flagged for manual review. My heart started racing as I quietly slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Melanie, who was still sleeping peacefully beside me. But when I walked into our kitchen, I found her standing by the window with her phone pressed to her ear, whispering in the urgent tone people use when they're planning something they shouldn't be. "Just drain everything," she said, her voice barely audible, but clear enough for me to hear every devastating word. "He won't know until it's already done, and by then we'll be long gone with all the money." The coffee mug in her hand trembled slightly as she continued her conversation, probably with someone who was helping her steal from her own husband. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she jumped like she'd been caught committing a crime. Coffee splashed across our kitchen counter as her face drained of all color, and her eyes went wide with the panic of someone whose secret had just been exposed. Right there in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my marriage was already dead, and that the woman I had loved and trusted for 8 years was planning to destroy my life. My phone started ringing while Melanie and I stared at each other across our kitchen. The caller ID showed our bank's customer service number, and I knew this call would determine how the rest of this conversation would go. "Answer it," I said calmly, holding up my phone so she could see who was calling. "Put it on speaker." Melanie's face went from pale to completely white as she realized that her plan was falling apart in real time. She watched helplessly as I accepted the call and pressed the speaker button. "Mr. Williams, this is security from First National Bank," the voice said professionally. "We've detected unusual activity on your joint checking account. Someone attempted to initiate a large wire transfer at 6 a.m. this morning. Can you confirm whether you authorized this transaction?" I looked directly into Melanie's eyes as I delivered my answer, watching her expression change from guilt to something much more dangerous. "No," I said clearly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my body. "I absolutely did not authorize any wire transfer this morning or any other time recently." The bank representative began explaining their fraud protection procedures, but I was focused on watching Melanie's face transform from panic and shame into something that looked like pure anger and calculation. After I hung up with the bank, Melanie launched into what was clearly a rehearsed explanation about why she had been trying to steal our life savings without my knowledge or permission. "I was trying to protect our finances from potential fraud," she said, her voice shaking as she struggled to make her lies sound believable. "I heard that our bank might be having security issues, so I wanted to move our money somewhere safer." Her story made no sense, and she seemed to realize it as the words came out of her mouth. She stumbled over details, contradicted herself within the same sentence, and rambled about threats that didn't exist and precautions that made no logical sense. I said nothing during her performance. I just stood there watching her dig herself deeper into lies while my mind processed everything I had heard and everything I was learning about who she really was. Inside, I felt like ice, cold, clear, and completely focused on protecting myself from someone who had been planning to betray me in the worst possible way. "You don't understand the danger we're in," she continued desperately, apparently unable to stop talking even though every word was making her situation worse. "I was going to tell you about moving the money after I made sure it was safe." When she finally ran out of lies, she changed tactics completely and demanded something that revealed her true intentions. "I need access to all our accounts right now," she said, her voice carrying new authority. "Give me all the passwords and account numbers immediately." I looked at Melanie calmly and spoke in the quiet voice of someone who was about to reveal information that would change everything about our conversation and our relationship. "Before we keep going with this discussion," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee like we were having a normal morning conversation, "let me tell you a story about what's really been happening in our marriage." Melanie's demanding expression shifted to confusion and then growing panic as she realized that I was about to say something that would destroy whatever control she thought she had over this situation. "This is the story of how my wife tried to empty our joint account," I continued, watching her face carefully for every reaction. But what she didn't know was that I had moved all the money weeks before she tried to steal it. The title of what was happening to us hung in the air between us like a weapon that had just been revealed. Melanie's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Her confident demands for account access disappeared completely, replaced by the dawning realization that her husband might not be as clueless as she had assumed when she was planning her betrayal. "How did you?" she started to ask, but her voice trailed off as the full implications of what I had just said began to sink in. She stopped demanding and started panicking, exactly as I had expected she would when the truth finally came out. Before I tell you how this story really started, I need to ask you for one important favor. Please leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because I want to see how far this story reaches people who understand what betrayal feels like. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear isn't just about money or bank accounts. This is a story about the kind of evil that hides behind a loving smile, about trust being weaponized against the person who shows it most freely. For 8 years, I thought I knew my wife. I believed that the woman I had married was honest, loyal, and committed to building a life together based on mutual respect and shared goals. I was wrong about Melanie, but I was right about my own ability to protect myself when I finally understood who she really was and what she was planning to do to me. This story begins about a month before that morning in our kitchen, when I first started noticing changes in Melanie's behavior that didn't make sense in the context of our normal relationship. The signs were subtle at first, the kind of things that could easily be explained away by someone who wanted to trust his wife more than he wanted to protect himself from painful truths. But looking back, I can see that everything she did was part of a calculated plan to steal everything I had worked for and leave me with nothing. About a month before the morning when I caught Melanie trying to drain our account, she began asking strange questions that seemed innocent at the time, but now made perfect sense as research for her theft. "How fast do banks usually process large wire transfers?" she asked during dinner one evening, making the question sound like casual conversation about financial procedures. "If something happened to you, who would get access to our savings accounts?" She wondered aloud while we were watching television, framing it as concern about estate planning and my well-being. "Do you think our bank has good security, or should we consider moving our money somewhere with better protection?" she asked another night, appearing to be worried about cybersecurity and fraud prevention. At the time, I thought she was just becoming more interested in our financial planning and security, which seemed like a positive development in our marriage. I answered all her questions honestly, giving her information that she was apparently planning to use against me. "What would happen if someone tried to access our accounts without permission?" she asked, pretending to be concerned about identity theft and unauthorized transactions. I explained our bank's fraud protection procedures and security measures, never suspecting that my wife was gathering intelligence for her own criminal activity. But the questions weren't the only change in Melanie's behavior that should have warned me about what was coming. Around the same time that Melanie started asking suspicious questions about her finances, she began coming home late from work with explanations that didn't quite add up when I thought about them carefully. "I had to stay for an emergency meeting with a difficult client," she would say, but her clothes didn't look like she had been sitting in a conference room for hours. "The boss needed help with a presentation that has to be perfect for tomorrow," she would explain, but she smelled like cologne that definitely wasn't mine and couldn't have come from any professional meeting. One evening, I heard her whispering in our guest bathroom with the door closed, speaking in the soft, playful tone that I hadn't heard her use with me for months. When I listened more carefully, I could hear a man's voice responding to her through the phone, but I couldn't make out the words clearly enough to understand what they were discussing. The conversation went on for over an hour, with Melanie laughing and speaking in the intimate way that people talk when they're planning a future together. Near the end of the call, I heard her say something that made my blood run cold. "Once the money is finally mine, we can go anywhere we want and start the life we've been dreaming about." The words hit me like a physical blow as I realized that my wife was planning to steal from me and leave with another man. The night after I overheard Melanie's phone conversation, she told me she had to work late again for another emergency client situation that required her immediate attention. Instead of believing her lies, I decided to follow her and see where she was really going when she claimed to be working overtime at her office. I waited until she left the house, then got in my car and carefully followed her route, staying far enough behind to avoid being noticed while keeping her car in sight. She didn't drive toward her office building. Instead, she headed to a parking lot behind a restaurant on the other side of town, where a tall man in expensive clothes was waiting beside a black SUV. I parked where I could see them clearly without being spotted, and I watched my wife get out of her car and walk directly into this stranger's arms like they had been lovers for a long time. They kissed with the passion and familiarity of people who had been together for months, not the awkward greeting of new acquaintances or casual friends. After several minutes of intimate conversation that I couldn't hear from my distance, Melanie handed the man an envelope that appeared to be thick with papers or documents. When I looked at the envelope more carefully through my car window, I could see writing on the outside that looked like it said account numbers in Melanie's handwriting. The next morning, I called my old college friend Franklin Yates, who had become a successful attorney specializing in family law and asset protection. I explained what I had discovered about Melanie's behavior and asked for advice about protecting myself legally. "You need to move your assets immediately," Franklin said without hesitation. "Don't wait another day. If she's planning to steal from joint accounts, you need to protect your money right now before she can access it." He explained that I had legal options for moving money from joint accounts into individual accounts as long as I documented everything properly and didn't hide assets that would be subject to division in divorce proceedings. "The key is to protect yourself from theft while maintaining transparency about what you're doing and why," Franklin continued. "You're not hiding money from a future divorce settlement. You're preventing someone from stealing money that belongs to both of you." Franklin gave me specific instructions about how to transfer funds legally while creating a paper trail that would prove my actions were defensive rather than deceptive. "There's also a way to legally freeze the joint account without her noticing immediately," he added. "You can set up alerts and restrictions that will prevent unauthorized large withdrawals while still allowing normal daily transactions." He scheduled an appointment for me to come to his office that afternoon to begin the paperwork that would protect my financial security from someone who was planning to destroy it. Over the next week, following Franklin's advice, I systematically moved everything valuable from our joint accounts into individual accounts that only I could access. I transferred our savings, our investment accounts, and our retirement funds into accounts under my name alone, creating a complete record of every transaction for legal purposes. The process was methodical and careful, designed to protect my assets without violating any laws or creating complications for future legal proceedings. I moved money during Melanie's work hours when she wouldn't be monitoring our accounts, and I made sure every transfer appeared to be routine financial management rather than suspicious activity. Within 7 days, I had secured everything that I had earned during our marriage and everything that I had brought into the relationship before we were married. Melanie had no idea that the money she was planning to steal was no longer accessible through the accounts she thought she could control. The joint checking account still contained enough money for normal household expenses and daily transactions, but the substantial savings and investments were now completely protected from her theft attempts. I also set up automatic alerts on all accounts that would notify me immediately if anyone attempted to access them without authorization or tried to make unusual transactions. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for Melanie to spring it herself. My phone buzzed at exactly 2:41 a.m. with an alert that made my heart race. Attempted login from an unrecognized device on your first national joint checking account. I carefully checked my phone without waking Melanie, who was sleeping peacefully beside me, apparently unaware that her husband was receiving notifications about her criminal activity. The alert showed that someone had tried to log into our account using a computer or phone that the bank didn't recognize as one of our usual devices. Over the next hour, my phone buzzed 5 more times with identical alerts. Someone was desperately trying to access our joint account, probably becoming more frustrated with each failed attempt. The login attempts were coming from an IP address that wasn't our home internet connection, suggesting that Melanie was trying to access our money from her lover's location or from some other computer that she thought would be more secure. Each failed attempt was being recorded by the bank's security system, creating evidence that someone was trying to commit unauthorized access to our accounts during the middle of the night when normal account holders would be sleeping. I lay there in the dark listening to my wife breathing beside me while her phone occasionally lit up with what were probably text messages from her partner in crime, discussing their failed attempts to steal my money. By morning, I had received 6 separate alerts about unauthorized login attempts, giving me perfect documentation of their criminal conspiracy. The next morning, Melanie was unusually sweet and affectionate, kissing me on the cheek and making breakfast with the kind of enthusiasm she hadn't shown for our relationship in months. "Good morning, honey," she said with a smile that seemed too wide and too bright for someone who had spent the previous night trying to commit bank fraud. She prepared eggs, bacon, and toast with careful attention to detail, serving everything on our best plates like we were celebrating some special occasion that I wasn't aware of. Her conversation was cheerful and loving, full of questions about my day and comments about our future plans together that seemed designed to make me feel secure and unsuspecting. But I could see the cracks in her performance. Her hands shook slightly when she poured my coffee, and her eyes kept darting to her phone like she was expecting important messages from someone. "You seem happy this morning," I observed, watching her reaction carefully while pretending to read the newspaper. "I just feel like things are going really well for us lately," she said, but her voice carried a nervous energy that contradicted her words. Near the end of breakfast, she asked the question that revealed what was really on her mind. "What's our current bank balance again? I want to make sure we have enough for that vacation we talked about." I knew she was fishing for information about the money she had been unable to access during her late-night hacking attempts. After breakfast, while Melanie was getting ready for work, I logged into our joint account to check the transaction history and security logs from the previous night. The bank system showed detailed records of all the failed login attempts, including timestamps, IP addresses, and the specific errors that had prevented access to our account. But more disturbing than the failed hacking attempts was what I found in our account's pending transactions folder. Melanie had already created a wire transfer draft for $47,000, which represented nearly every penny that she thought was still in our joint checking account. The transfer was scheduled to execute on Sunday morning, which was the day I was supposed to leave town for a work conference that I had mentioned to her several weeks earlier. She had planned everything perfectly, timing the theft for when I would be out of town and unable to discover the missing money until it was too late to stop the transfer or trace where the funds had gone. The destination account for the wire transfer was registered to a name I didn't recognize, but the routing number belonged to a bank in a state where we had never lived or traveled. Her plan was sophisticated and well-researched, designed to steal everything while making it difficult for me to recover the money or prove who was responsible for the theft. But what Melanie didn't know was that the account she planned to empty was already empty, and that her crime would be documented but unsuccessful. Following Franklin's instructions, I spent the next few days gathering evidence that would prove Melanie's criminal intent and protect me in the legal proceedings that I knew were coming. I took screenshots of the pending wire transfer that she had created without my knowledge or permission. I printed out the security logs showing her repeated attempts to access our accounts during the middle of the night. I recorded phone calls where she asked suspicious questions about bank procedures, and I documented the times when she came home late claiming to be at work but smelling like another man's cologne. The evidence wasn't collected for revenge or to hurt Melanie personally. It was gathered for court proceedings where I would need to prove that she had attempted to commit theft and fraud against her own husband. I organized everything into folders labeled with dates and descriptions, creating a timeline that showed how her criminal behavior had developed over several weeks of planning and preparation. Franklin had explained that judges take financial crimes between spouses very seriously, especially when one partner tries to steal money before filing for divorce. Intent to defraud was highlighted in yellow on the legal documents that Franklin had prepared for me, explaining how Melanie's behavior met the legal definition of several serious crimes. I saved the last piece of evidence on Friday evening, knowing that Sunday would bring the confrontation that would end our marriage and expose her true character to everyone involved. We returned to that Sunday morning in our kitchen, with Melanie staring at me in growing panic as she realized that her careful plan had somehow failed without her understanding why or how. She grabbed her phone and frantically opened our banking app, checking the balance on our joint account and finding exactly what I had expected her to find. Where did the money go? she screamed, her voice echoing through our house with the rage of someone whose theft had been prevented by circumstances beyond her control. Her fingers flew across her phone screen as she checked our other accounts, discovering that everything substantial had been moved beyond her reach weeks before her scheduled crime. I sat at our kitchen table and calmly sipped my coffee, watching her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and growing desperation as she understood that her victim had not been as naive as she had assumed. "The money was never yours to take, Melanie," I said quietly, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had been prepared for this moment for weeks. "Everything you were planning to steal belongs to both of us legally, but you have no right to take it without my knowledge and consent for your own criminal purposes." She stopped screaming and lunged toward my phone, probably hoping to delete the evidence I had been gathering or access my accounts before I could stop her. But I was ready for her desperation, and I calmly moved my phone out of her reach. While Melanie was still processing the failure of her theft attempt, her phone started ringing with the aggressive tone she had set for important calls. The name on her screen said, "Kyle," and she answered immediately without thinking about the fact that I was sitting right there listening to every word of their conversation. "Did you get the money or not?" A man's voice demanded through the speaker, his tone angry and impatient. "We were supposed to leave town this morning with everything, and I'm sitting here waiting for you to confirm that the transfer went through." Melanie's face collapsed as she realized that her lover was revealing their entire conspiracy in front of her husband, confirming everything I had suspected about their relationship and their plans. "There's been a problem," she whispered into the phone, trying to keep her voice low even though I could hear every word clearly. "What kind of problem?" Kyle demanded. "You said this would be easy. You said your husband was too stupid to figure out what was happening until we were already gone." The cruel honesty of their conversation revealed how little respect either of them had for me as a person, and how long they had been planning to betray my trust for their own financial gain. I held up my phone and showed Melanie that I was recording their entire conversation, creating evidence that would prove their criminal conspiracy and their intent to commit theft and fraud. Her face went completely white as she understood that her crime was being documented in real time. Faced with overwhelming evidence of her criminal behavior, Melanie suddenly changed tactics and tried to rewrite the history of our marriage to make herself appear to be the victim of my supposed abuse and control. "I was scared," she said, her voice shaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion but felt completely calculated and false. "You've been controlling our finances and threatening me for months. I was trying to protect myself from your emotional abuse." Her transformation from confident criminal to frightened victim was so sudden and complete that it would have been convincing to someone who hadn't witnessed her real behavior over the past several weeks. "I felt trapped in this marriage with no access to money or resources," she continued, apparently hoping that claims of domestic abuse would justify her attempted theft. "Everything I did was just trying to survive and get away from someone who was threatening my safety." Her performance was designed to manipulate my emotions and make me feel guilty for protecting myself from her crimes, but I had learned too much about her true character to fall for obvious lies and manipulation. "That's an interesting story, Melanie," I said calmly, reaching into my briefcase to pull out printed documents that would destroy her attempt to flip the narrative of our relationship. "But I have something here that tells a completely different story about who was really planning to hurt whom in this marriage." I placed the call logs and bank records on our kitchen table where she could see exactly how much evidence I had gathered about her criminal conspiracy. That afternoon, I walked into Franklin's law office carrying a folder full of evidence that documented every aspect of Melanie's criminal behavior and her conspiracy with Kyle to steal our life savings. Franklin spent an hour reviewing the recordings, bank logs, security alerts, and photographs that I had gathered over the previous month of investigation. "This is the most comprehensive documentation of spousal fraud I've ever seen," he said, looking up from the evidence with obvious satisfaction. "Your wife isn't just guilty of attempted theft. She's committed multiple felonies that will destroy any chance she has of claiming abuse or receiving favorable treatment in divorce proceedings." He explained that the recorded conversation with Kyle, combined with the bank security logs and the pending wire transfer, created an airtight case against both of them for conspiracy, attempted theft, and fraud. "She's completely done," Franklin concluded, beginning to draft legal documents that would protect me and ensure that Melanie faced appropriate consequences for her crimes. No judge will have any sympathy for someone who tried to steal from her own husband while planning to leave him for another man. Franklin prepared divorce papers that included charges of gross marital misconduct, which would prevent Melanie from claiming any portion of assets that she had tried to steal through criminal activity. We'll also be filing criminal complaints that could result in felony charges for both your wife and her accomplice, he added, organizing the evidence for submission to law enforcement agencies. Over the next few days, Melanie sent me dozens of text messages that cycled through every possible emotional manipulation tactic as she realized that her crimes had been discovered and documented. First came the begging messages, "Please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you and I want to save our marriage. We can work through this together if you'll just give me another chance." When I didn't respond to her pleas for forgiveness, the messages turned angry and accusatory. "You're destroying our family over a misunderstanding. I can't believe you're being so cruel and vindictive about something that wasn't even that serious." Then came the guilt-tripping messages designed to make me feel responsible for her criminal behavior. "I only did this because I felt so alone and neglected in our marriage. If you had been a better husband, I never would have made these mistakes." Each message revealed more about her manipulative personality and her inability to accept responsibility for choices that had damaged our relationship beyond any possibility of repair. She alternated between different tactics throughout the week, probably hoping that one of them would work and convince me to drop the legal proceedings that were moving forward. But I didn't respond to any of her messages, understanding that engagement would only encourage more manipulation and wouldn't lead to any genuine acknowledgement of what she had done wrong. Franklin had advised me to save all her messages as additional evidence of her attempts to manipulate the victim of her crimes. Court day arrived with the kind of gray winter weather that seemed appropriate for the legal reckoning that was about to unfold in Judge Harrison's courtroom. Melanie walked into the courthouse wearing the expensive pearl necklace that I had bought her for our 5th wedding anniversary, apparently hoping to project an image of respectability and innocence. Her lawyer carried himself with the confident swagger of someone who believed his client's false claims about domestic abuse and financial control would generate sympathy from a judge who didn't know the real facts about our marriage. Melanie's expression showed complete confidence that her lies would be believed and that she would walk away with at least half of everything I had worked for during our 8 years together. She had probably convinced herself that her victim's story was true, or at least believable enough to fool a legal system that often favors women in divorce proceedings regardless of the actual facts. But what Melanie and her lawyer didn't know was that I had brought evidence that would expose every lie she had told and prove the real story about who had tried to victimize whom in our marriage. Judge Harrison called our case and asked if both parties were prepared to present their evidence and testimony. Melanie's lawyer stood up first, probably planning to establish her false narrative before I had a chance to contradict it with facts. But Judge Harrison turned to me and asked, "Mr. Williams, I understand you have brought substantial evidence to present to this court?" I stood up and carefully placed everything on the evidence table where Judge Harrison could examine it. Printed transcripts of Melanie's recorded conversations with Kyle, bank security logs showing her attempted unauthorized access to our accounts, screenshots of the wire transfer she had created without my permission, and photographs documenting her secret meetings with her lover. "Your Honor, this evidence will show that my wife attempted to commit theft, fraud, and conspiracy against her own husband while planning to abandon their marriage for another man," I said, organizing the documents in chronological order to tell the complete story of her criminal behavior. The judge examined each piece of evidence carefully, taking notes as he reviewed the recordings, bank logs, and security alerts that documented every aspect of Melanie's crimes. When he listened to the recorded phone call, where Kyle demanded to know whether she had gotten the money, Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose with obvious surprise at the brazen nature of their criminal conspiracy. "This appears to document a systematic attempt to defraud the plaintiff of marital assets," Judge Harrison observed, holding up the pending wire transfer that Melanie had created for $47,000. "The defendant appears to have planned this theft for weeks, timing it to coincide with the plaintiff's business travel to maximize the chances of success and minimize the likelihood of immediate discovery. Melanie's lawyer tried to object to the admissibility of some evidence, but his arguments were weak and unconvincing given the comprehensive nature of the documentation I had provided. Judge Harrison overruled every objection, stating that evidence of criminal activity was clearly relevant to divorce proceedings involving asset distribution and claims of misconduct. Melanie's confident expression crumbled completely as she listened to Judge Harrison describe her criminal behavior using legal terminology that made the seriousness of her situation impossible to ignore or minimize. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper frantically in her ear, probably trying to prepare some kind of damage control strategy now that their entire case had been destroyed by evidence he hadn't known existed. But there was no reasonable defense for attempted theft, fraud, and conspiracy, especially when the crimes were documented with audio recordings, bank logs, and security alerts that proved intent and planning. Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding, Melanie said desperately, standing up to address the court directly when her lawyer couldn't come up with any credible explanation for her behavior. I was scared and confused, and I made some poor decisions when I was feeling threatened and desperate, she continued, still trying to portray herself as a victim despite overwhelming evidence of her criminal activity. But her claims of fear and desperation sounded hollow and unconvincing when compared to recorded conversations where she had laughed about her husband being too stupid to discover her theft until it was too late. Judge Harrison looked at Melanie with the stern expression of someone who had been lied to in his own courtroom and was not inclined to show mercy to someone who had attempted to manipulate the legal system through false testimony. Mrs. Williams, these recordings appear to contradict your claims about being scared or threatened, he said, referring to the evidence where she had celebrated her plans with obvious satisfaction. Judge Harrison called a brief recess to review all the evidence thoroughly, and when he returned to deliver his ruling, his expression made it clear that he had reached a definitive conclusion about the true facts of our marriage and Melanie's criminal behavior. After reviewing the comprehensive evidence presented by the plaintiff, this court finds that the defendant has committed multiple acts of attempted fraud, theft, and conspiracy against her own husband, Judge Harrison announced with the authority of legal judgment. The defendant's claims of abuse and financial control are contradicted by clear evidence that she was the one planning to commit financial crimes against the plaintiff while conducting an extramarital affair with an accomplice. He paused to look directly at Melanie before delivering the consequences for her actions. Due to the defendant's intentional financial misconduct and criminal behavior during the marriage, the court awards her no portion of the marital assets. Melanie gasped like the air had been stolen from her lungs as she processed the reality that her crimes had not only failed, but had cost her everything she might have legitimately received in a normal divorce proceeding. Furthermore, the defendant is responsible for all court costs and attorney fees incurred by the plaintiff in defending himself against false accusations and protecting his assets from theft. Judge Harrison's ruling was more comprehensive and punitive than even Franklin had predicted, reflecting the judge's obvious disgust with Melanie's criminal behavior and fraudulent testimony. The gavel came down with a finality that ended both our marriage and Melanie's dreams of stealing my life's work to fund her new relationship with Kyle. Judge Harrison's final ruling granted me everything I had been fighting to protect: full control of all marital assets, sole ownership of our house, complete authority over all bank accounts and investments, and zero obligations for alimony or ongoing financial support. The plaintiff has demonstrated that he acted responsibly to protect assets from theft while maintaining complete legal transparency about his actions, the judge explained, validating every decision I had made during the weeks when I was preparing for this confrontation. The defendant's criminal behavior has forfeited any claim to marital property or ongoing financial support from the man she attempted to defraud. Melanie left the courtroom sobbing, her expensive clothes and confident demeanor replaced by the reality of someone who had gambled everything on a criminal scheme and lost completely. Her lawyer gathered his papers in obvious embarrassment, probably realizing that he had taken a case based on lies and false accusations that had destroyed his client's life and reputation. Kyle was nowhere to be seen, having apparently abandoned Melanie as soon as he realized that there would be no stolen money to fund their planned escape together. Franklin walked beside me as we left the courthouse, carrying copies of all the legal documents that proved my victory and Melanie's comprehensive defeat. "You're free," he said, tapping my shoulder with the satisfaction of someone who had helped deliver justice for a client who deserved protection and vindication. The nightmare of betrayal and criminal conspiracy was finally over, and my future was secure from people who had tried to destroy it through lies and theft. A month later, I was living peacefully in the house that Melanie had tried to steal, enjoying the quiet satisfaction that comes from protecting yourself successfully from people who mistake trust for weakness. Melanie had tried calling me several times during the first week after the divorce was finalized, probably hoping to manipulate me into giving her money or assistance despite everything she had done to betray our marriage. But I had blocked her number and all her social media accounts, understanding that any contact would only provide her with opportunities for more manipulation and false accusations. Her lover Kyle had disappeared completely once he realized that Melanie was broke and facing potential criminal charges rather than wealthy and ready to fund their new life together. Their relationship had been based on greed rather than love, and it collapsed immediately when the money they had planned to steal was no longer available to support their dreams. Melanie's arrogance and sense of entitlement had destroyed her life completely, leaving her with nothing except the consequences of choices that had revealed her true character to everyone involved. My life, on the other hand, was better than it had been in years. I was free from deception, manipulation, and the constant stress of living with someone who was secretly planning to betray me. The peace and security I had fought to protect were finally mine to enjoy without fear of theft or manipulation from people who had seen my trust as an opportunity for exploitation. My final thought as I locked my front door that evening was simple but important. Never play games with a man who already knows the ending.